Hey you guys, welcome to my channel. So we're going to be talking today about some forgotten 1970s TV movie goodness. So let's get started. So you know how sometimes when you're bored, kind of hungover, maybe it's Sunday, you've been out late the night before, and you kind of go poking around on YouTube looking for some sort of comforting 1970s horror to watch while you eat lunch in front of your computer, just as a hypothetical situation. And you know how every now and then you kind of fortuitously stumble across this made for TV movie from 1977 that you had actually never previously heard of, and how sometimes that movie ends up having been written by the late great Richard Matheson and stars Karen Black. Motherfucking sexy ass Karen Black. Isn't that fucking rad when that happens? It is quite fucking rad. So the movie that we're talking about today, and this is exactly how I stumbled across it, is called The Strange Possession of Mrs. Oliver. Now, this is pretty much something of a forgotten gem, I feel like, from the late 1970s. And despite its kind of pedigree, I guess, it really hasn't gotten a lot of attention. You really don't hear anybody talking about it. I don't see it streaming anywhere. I don't even think it's ever been released on DVD, or I don't even know if it was even released on VHS, crazily. The version that I saw on YouTube, it seemed like somebody had taped it off TV, like during the original telecast or something, or during a re-telecast, and then just like uploaded it to YouTube. So it's not the greatest quality. And honestly, that's really kind of a shame, because even though, I mean, obviously this isn't up there with, you know, like Richard Matheson's best work or Karen Black's best work, but it's still like a really eerie mystery that had a really good twist ending that I in no way, shape, or form saw coming. And that is quite an achievement, I have to say. Was also directed, I found out later, by a German director named Gordon Hessler, and that's the same guy who directed Scream and Scream Again, the one that had Vincent Price, Peter Cushing, I think Christopher Lee was in it as well. I reviewed that like a long time ago on my other channel. And The Golden Voyage of Sinbad. And in the 1950s and 1960s, he was actually a producer on Alfred Hitchcock Presents, like the TV series, and the Alfred Hitchcock Hour. So like I said, this has like a lot of muscle going on, like behind and in front of the camera. And it's pretty fucking great. And it makes me sad that like a lot of people haven't seen it or even heard of it, and that it's not really easily available. In this movie, The Strange Possession of Mrs. Oliver, Karen Black plays sort of the title character, Miriam Oliver, who's sort of like this unhappy housewife who seems to be kind of straining under the very controlling behavior of her husband, who's kind of a butt plug, and his name is George, and he's actually played by George Hamilton. Now, he's this big hotshot lawyer, and it seems as though he wants nothing more out of life than basically a wife that will dress like a Mormon schoolmarm, pump out babies whenever he wants one, and never leave the house or question his authority for any reason whatsoever. So as you might expect, Miriam is getting kind of resentful of the fact that she's not allowed to have a job or go to college. 1977, y'all. I mean, this was like pretty backward even for 1977, but I digress. And that Greg is like kind of pressuring her to have a child before she feels like she's really ready. Now, her character in the movie, they do kind of bring this up, is supposed to be 26. And when you're watching it, and this is no slight on Karen Black because I think she's beautiful, but it's pretty obvious that she's older than 26 in this movie, but she's playing a 26-year-old character. I actually looked it up later to see how old she actually was, and she was actually a decade older. She's like 36 in this. And as I said, it's pretty readily apparent. She looks great, but she doesn't look like she's 26. You know what I'm saying? Okay. At this point, she starts getting mad, and she doesn't really want to confront him directly because she's a little bit kind of mousy, I guess. So she starts to sort of like rebel in sort of more subtle ways or passive aggressive kind of ways. Like she keeps taking her birth control pills like on the sly, even though she's told him that she stopped taking them. And she's at the mall one day, and she kind of is drawn to this one particular shop, and she's sort of like compelled to buy this really tight, low-cut red blouse, this blonde wig, and some red lipstick, and these real snazzy like hoop earrings. Like she's just like drawn to these things. So she buys them all. She takes them back to the house, and she puts all of the stuff on, and she's pretty like jazzed, but also kind of like freaked out. She's like, I look like a completely different person. Holy crap. And so she's like kind of into it, but it also kind of scares her a little bit. She kind of even starts to act differently, like when she has this costume on. Now, Greg kind of sees this and he doesn't really get it. He's like, he thinks that she's like losing her marbles pretty much. He's sort of, I mean, to his credit, he does seem to kind of try to be understanding a little bit, but it does really seem to come to pass that Miriam is actually having some kind of like full-blown identity crisis and may in fact be possessed, just as the title suggests, because remember, this is called The Possession of Mrs. Oliver. See, one thing that I neglected to mention is that at the beginning of the film, and I think one or two other times subsequently, like throughout the running time, Miriam has been having these really, really creepy nightmares of attending a funeral and looking into the coffin, and then she sees herself lying there. These are actually like really good. I really liked these funeral sequences. They're super creepy. I don't know, there's something like really creepy about late 1970s. I don't know if it was like the way it was shot or something like that, but there's always like something really unsettling about, even in TV movies. I don't know what it is. But yeah, so she's having these really creepy nightmares. She also has kind of these recurrent visions. One of them is usually a fire. She also has visions of like a little bouquet of like black or dark purple flowers of some kind, and the sounds of a dog barking, and the sounds of a woman screaming. Like, she has these nightmares and stuff, and she doesn't know what any of it means. She also keeps seeing this dude in like a gray sweatshirt and a pretty sweet porn stash, not gonna lie. He drives this red pickup truck that inexplicably says gasoline on the side of it. I'm just kind of like, okay. That's not like a company name or anything. It just says gasoline. And I'm just like, clearly that's a truck. That's not gasoline, but okay. Maybe that's the truck's name. So on a whim, Miriam decides she's going to rent a cottage on the beach without asking her husband's permission. Uh-oh. Scandalous. He's pissed off. But after he sees, like, he kind of yells at her about it, but after he sees how upset she is and how badly she wants to have it, he says, oh yeah, well, maybe we should rent a beach house so we can get away for a while. But of course, he wants to be the one to pick it out because that's just kind of the way the dude is. He can't let her have one single thing, like, for herself and all this other kind of shit. He also makes her an appointment, like, without asking her, to go see a psychiatrist. Now, when he tells her this, she seems like relieved. Yeah, I've been having a hard time and stuff like that. And she's like, yeah, I'm totally going to go. But let me go to the appointment by myself. And he's just kind of like, okay, well, I have to go out of town for a trial anyway, so I'm going to trust you to go. I'm sure you really do want to go. She's like, oh, totally. So, of course, she skips out on the appointment. She had no intention of going. And instead, she puts on her costume, like the red lipstick and the red sweater or whatever, and heads for the beach house. Now, a dog starts following her around, seeming to, like, know who she is. While she's wandering around, she kind of ducks into this bar in town. And when she does this, she kind of decides, well, since I have this new look, this new identity, that I should have a new name. So because it's a beach town, there's, like, a restaurant or something like that. It's called Sandy something or other. So she's like, okay, well, my new identity is Sandy. I'm going to be Sandy. Oddly, though, as soon as she sits down at the bar, the very surprised bartender addresses her as Sandy and asks where she's been. Now, this freaks her out pretty much. She's like, dude, like literally 3 seconds ago, I decided that I was going to be called Sandy, and now he's already like, hey, Sandy, where you been? And I was just like, what the fuck is going on with this? So she tells him, well, my name's not really Sandy. And he's like, well, it's the damnedest thing. You look just like Sandy, this girl that always used to come in here. And then, like, even when she orders the drink, he's like, that's the same goddamn drink that Sandy used to order. It's like, and you're telling me you're not Sandy? You look exactly like her. So the bartender even asks, like, there's 2 other guys in the bar, like her regulars, presumably. And they're like, whatever happened to Sandy? And they're like, oh, she moved away or something like that. We haven't seen her in a long time. So Miriam is kind of, like, weirded out by this, but she's like, okay, whatever. So she goes and sits down at a table near the dance floor to kind of, like, have her drink or whatever. And then, who should sleaze up to her but Mr. Sweatshirt Von Pornstash, the guy from her dream. Now, she's afraid of him, as you would be, because it's like, if you had recurring nightmares about a dude, and then he, like, comes sleazing up to you, like, in a bar, I'd be like, yeah, I'd be, like, running the fuck out of there. So he's basically like getting all up in her grill and being, I know you're Sandy. You really need to stop lying about it. And she's like, dude, I don't know what you're talking about. Fuck off. I mean, she doesn't say fuck off. It's a TV movie, but you know what I mean? She's like, leave me alone. I don't know what you're talking about. Luckily, though, like this extra from Saturday Night Fever, not really, kind of like boogies over and like rescues her, says, hey, why don't you come dance with me? And then she says, well, I can't really dance. And when she starts to dance, like she's all like awkward and shit. But then she starts dancing and then she's like really good at it. Like once she kind of gets into her groove, right? Just like on fucking Solid Gold. She's all getting all about it, like with the disco and whatnot. And naturally, this is making Porn Stash really suspicious because he's like, man, that looks exactly the way Sandy used to dance. So this bitch is Sandy and I don't know why she's saying that she's not. So Miriam is getting like more and more wigged out, right? Because Porn Stash keeps basically like following her around town, and she has this the funeral dream again when she's at the beach house this time, but this time like the end of it is different, where it kind of ends with this big like blaze, this big conflagration, and Porn Stash is like leering at her like through the flames or whatever. So from that, this is a mystery, right? I know what you're thinking, because I was thinking the same thing the first time I watched this movie. But I can assure you that what you were thinking is going on is not actually what's going on. So I'm going to say, if you don't want the ending of this movie spoiled, you can go watch it on YouTube, as far as I know, like for free. So go and watch it and then come back and we can talk about it, because I don't want to spoil the ending for you, because it's a doozy. And I totally didn't see it coming. So you might want to stop listening at this point if you want to watch it and don't want it spoiled. You have been warned, and this is your last warning. So you are probably thinking, as I was the first time that I watched this movie, that what ended up happening was that Porn Stash killed Sandy by burning her house down, and that Sandy's ghost is possessing Miriam, right? I mean, that's what I thought was going on. The word possession is right there in the title. So I was like, well, obviously this is like a ghost story, right? It's, Sandy's dead. She's trying to like reach out from beyond the grave and possess this random woman and, trying to get everybody to like, hey, you murdered me or whatever. This is not what's happening. It's kind of close, but it's much, much weirder. So Miriam gets back into her like Mormon drag, realizing that her husband, Greg, is going to be home from his trip soon. And she's like, yeah, I better get the fuck back to the homestead, or he's going to like find out that I've been gone this whole time. But the dog that's been following her all around the town, like, and won't leave her alone, like jumps in her car and won't get out. So finally, she kind of like gets exasperated, and she asks a neighbor, who the fuck's dog is this? Like, who does this belong to? He says, oh, that's Mrs. Dempsey's dog. And Mrs. Dempsey lives a couple blocks away in, and I quote, a black house with a black fence. Again, I know what you're thinking. It's a black house because it's all burned, right? And Mrs. Dempsey is Sandy, and Sandy's dead, right? Wrong. I was like, the whole time I'm like, we really need to try to stop guessing what's going on in this fucking movie, because you're not gonna guess. Well, I didn't guess. I mean, it's very convoluted and strange. So when Miriam finds the house, it's just a regular unarsoned house that for some reason is painted entirely black, which is like some shit that I would do if I didn't have live in a neighborhood with an HOA. So there you go. So an old woman answers the door and says, yeah, the dog belongs to Mrs. Dempsey, but she's away until later this evening. I don't know who this woman is, if she's like related or if she's just house sitting or the housekeeper or whatever. Now the old woman calls the dog Henry, and that freaks Miriam out for some reason. And then she's freaked out like even more when she sees this pot of black flowers like on the porch, like on the windowsill, because remember, she'd been having like visions of these bouquets of black flowers. Then as she's leaving, she's like, yeah, I'm gonna come back later. She glances through like a window of the house and sees a painting of a girl who looks a lot like her, with like the blonde hair, because she had the wig over her dark hair, a tight red blouse, and hoop earrings. Miriam like loses her shit, as you would, and asks the woman at the door, she's like, who is that girl in the painting? But the old woman doesn't know, because like I said, it's not her house. She says, yeah, why don't you come back later? Mrs. Dempsey will be back at 7, and you can like sort it all out, then. By the way, Porn Stash has also been lurking around this whole time. So there's that. Just assume that like Porn Stash is like, just creeping around in the background, because he was like creeping around in the background pretty much the whole time. So Miriam then passes by this other neighbor and asks if Mrs. Dempsey had a daughter. The guy doesn't really remember at first, but then he says, oh yeah, I think I remember somebody mentioned that Mrs. Dempsey had a daughter who died 5 years ago. Aha, you think. See, Sandy is dead. Wrong again. I told you guys to stop trying to guess. I tried to guess the whole time and I was wrong every single time. It was just like, that's why I think that's why I remembered this movie so much, because I'm usually pretty good at like guessing in the ballpark of like how shit's gonna go. I totally did not guess how this is gonna go. It was just crazy. So meanwhile, back at the Oliver house, the Greg Oliver prison for matronly breeder wives, as I like to call it, hubby has returned from the business trip, and he's calling around to try and figure out where his absconded wife has gotten off to. So he finds out that she skipped her shrink appointment, obviously, and surmises, correctly I might add, that she probably went to her beach house. So he heads on over there to give her a good talking to. Miriam, at this point, who is still being stalked by Porn Stash, goes back to the Dempsey house. And here's where the big bombshell finally comes to light. Mrs. Dempsey opens the door and sees Miriam there, although she can't see her completely because it's kind of like dusk and her face is kind of like partially in shadow. She seems like really, really pissed off and accuses Miriam of like playing a sick joke on her. Mrs. Dempsey asks, "Who are you?" And when Miriam says her name, Mrs. Dempsey is all, "Fuck you." And I'm just kind of like, what the fuck is, okay, what is going on? Mrs. Dempsey, she doesn't say fuck you. Like I said, it's a TV movie. But you can imagine, it was that sentiment. So Mrs. Dempsey turns on the porch light, sees Miriam's face properly, and then calls Miriam Sandy. Miriam, like, protests. She's like, no, I'm not Sandy. She's like, and then she asks about Mrs. Dempsey's dead daughter in the painting. And then Mrs. Dempsey says, that painting isn't my daughter. It's a portrait that my daughter painted of her best friend, Sandy. And then she holds up like a framed photograph and like thrusts it at Miriam. This is my daughter, she says. This was my daughter, Miriam. And right there in the photo is Miriam, like the matronly Miriam from the beginning of the movie, with the librarian bun and the giant 70s glasses and the Mormon looking blouse and everything in the picture. At this point, I'm like, what in the Samuel Langhorne hell is going on here? Okay, pay attention. This is what happened. This took me a while to sort this out. 5 years earlier, Porn Stash, who's actually named Mark. I don't think you find that out until like near the end of the movie. I just called him Porn Stash the whole movie. He was supposed to marry Sandy, but she broke up with his ass like 5 years ago, and he didn't take it too well. So one night, Sandy and Miriam were at Sandy's house. Porn Stash shows up and sets Sandy's car on fire, as you would, because he has some issues. The fire ended up spreading to the house. Sandy got away, but Miriam and Sandy's parents both died in the fire. So basically, the Miriam we've been following through this whole movie really was Sandy the whole time. She just felt so guilty that Miriam had died because of her that she essentially dissociated and took over Miriam's identity. So as Miriam, she met and married Greg, and so he never knew her as anybody other than like matronly Miriam, because that's like who she was. But after several years, I guess like fragments of her original personality, which was Sandy, kept filtering back to her. And that was why, like, throughout the movie, like, especially toward the beginning when she first, like, you know, bought the red blouse and the wig and she was, like, talking to Greg about identity crisis, she kept telling Greg that she felt suffocated and that she wanted to be her real self, but she couldn't really articulate to him what that was. So, like, deep down, she knew that she was really, like, this freewheeling party girl, Sandy, but Greg had only ever known her as like this kind of staid conservative Miriam. That's the only person he knew. So there you have it. There was no possession. There was no ghosts. There was nothing supernatural. It was just like identity dissociation. So at the very end, porn stash like pops up again and tries to kill Miriam slash Sandy, but is saved when Greg kind of like arrives just in the nick of time. Now she tells him this whole convoluted tale, tells him who she really is, and he seems surprisingly okay with it, considering like what a douche canoe he had been before. Although it could just be that he's being nicer, like humoring her, and then like as soon as he gets home, he's gonna call the men with the butterfly nets after the credits roll, you know what I mean? That seems like the kind of dick move that he would pull, I'm just saying. This movie, I really enjoyed this a lot. And actually, if anybody ever asked me, like, what are some, like, obscure 70s movies that you would recommend, this is always one of the ones that I recommend because I feel like I'm the only fucking person in the world that ever seen it. And I only saw it completely accidentally because I was just scrolling through it. There's a couple channels on YouTube that have like a lot of 70s TV movies, and for some reason I'm every now and then I get like in a mood for those because I just really like the vibe of those 1970s TV movies. So there, I was on one of those channels and I saw one and I saw that Karen Black was in it and I was like, ooh, I love Karen Black. So, you know what I mean? She was in Burnt Offerings and fucking Trilogy of Terror and gee, she's great. So I was like, oh, I never even heard of that or seen it. And then I found out it was written by Richard Matheson and all this other kind of stuff. I'm like, holy shit, how does nobody ever talk about this? And it's fucking great. And like I said, it's a mystery, and even though it's called The Strange Possession of Mrs. Oliver, you know, it's not supernatural. Like, it ends up not being supernatural, but you don't even care because the mystery is just so intriguing. Like, the whole time, like, you're kind of going around like, what the fuck is it? What the fuck is this now? Holy shit. And it's like, what the hell's going on? And I love that I absolutely did not guess. I like that it kind of made you, because remember, like I said, when I was talking about it earlier, there was like 3 or 4 points in there where I was like, oh, it must be blah, blah, blah. And it was never that. So the way that it like subverts your expectations, I thought that was like so great, because I don't see a lot of movies that can do that, because I've read so much horror and I've seen so much horror and it's like everything's been done, you know, and I've seen other stuff with like dissociative identity kind of stuff, but I wasn't expecting that. And I think it was really clever that they called it The Strange Possessions. You'd be expecting that it was going to be a ghost story, because the whole time I was thinking it was a ghost story because it was kind of creepy and stuff, but then it turned out not to be that, and I was just kind of like, you got me, all right, I see what you did there. But yeah, I really, really did enjoy this quite a lot. I mean, Karen Black was fucking great. I mean, essentially, I don't want to say she's playing 2 roles because she was still like the same person, but it was kind of like playing 2 roles because she was kind of like playing somebody that had like 2 different personalities essentially, or somebody with one personality where another personality was like filtering out. So she was like really great. George Hamilton was really good as her husband. He was, you know, an asshole, but he wasn't like a cartoon villain. You know, he still had some like redeeming qualities. And honestly, I mean, the one scene where Mrs. Dempsey hands Miriam the photo of herself, like the, you know, Mormon-y looking one, my jaw fell open. I was just like, what? You know what I mean? Because I totally did not see that coming. So yeah, like I said, I didn't even mind that it wasn't a ghost story or anything like that, just because the mystery was so good and like the resolution of it was so satisfying, like at least for me. So man, if you're into Richard Matheson, if you're into Karen Black, if you're into 70s creepy TV movies, which I totally am, then see if you can find this on YouTube and like check it out. It's actually really, really good. I enjoyed it quite a lot. They made a lot of really good made-for-TV horror in the 1970s, and this definitely needs more recognition because I feel like I don't really see anybody talking about it. And other than YouTube, I don't really even see, it's like I said, it's not even streaming anywhere. I don't even think you can get it on, you maybe could get it on VHS, but I doubt it. Like made-for-TV movies, a lot of them sort of like disappeared because they were just broadcast a couple times and then I don't know, they just got taped over. I don't know. Because a lot of them, it seems like, unless it was something like Duel or something like that, which is like Steven Spielberg and like somebody that got super famous later on, I feel like they didn't even like keep them or give that much of a shit about them because they just like, oh, we're just filling a time slot. And it's kind of a shame because this was actually like a pretty great movie, and I feel like it's sort of, not even sort of forgotten about, totally forgotten about. But yeah, so check it out, and if you've seen it, let me know what you think about it in the comments, and thanks again for watching. Goodbye.